Chapter 15:12, Catastrophe. It wasn't long into the battle before most of the platforms the Zist had constructed were completely destroyed. The armored ants, in their insane zeal, had smashed everything they could in their charge, latching onto the Krath's trained monsters, forcing themselves into their mouths, or simply flinging themselves into the air, dragging their victims down with them. Now Zaluth could see the cursed creatures were slowly pulling themselves up the walls of the heart, eager to try again. The battle had moved to the walls and roof of the lower chamber, the Krath and their beasts clinging to the moving surface and fighting with the ferocity and cunning their kind was known for. But even here, there were nightmares waiting for the slugs. The shadows themselves had turned against them. No patch of darkness remained ordinary and safe for long, they deepened, and moments later, nets would fly out, or flashing mandibles. He'd seen more than one Krath dragged into the pooling shadows, surely never to return. Danger was everywhere, and Zaluth could feel the acid surging in his flesh as he tried desperately to keep himself alive. Flat against the wall, he conjured the power he cultivated inside of him and spat it forth, a jet of acid that seared across the wall and burned into the mucus coating the heart. He was too slow, the shadow he'd targeted had already faded. Or perhaps, moved. Zaluth's eyes twisted atop their stalks, trying to see in every direction at once. The creature of shadow and teeth wasn't far away anymore. Every minute that passed, those grasping, lashing, squeezing limbs got closer and closer. He would need to move further up soon, but if things didn't change, then soon there would be no space left and the Krath would be forced back to the upper chamber. He gathered his acid once more and prepared to spit, a condensed ball of power, sent straight to the heart of the forest of tentacles, but something caught his eye at the last second. Zaluth flung himself to the side just as the axe crashed into the heart right beside him. Zaluth reacted instantly, turning and unleashing the ball of acid, but he struck nothing, his shot flying too high. Unbelievably, a human was there, thick shoulders, corded muscle on his arms and a hefty axe in his hands. The man was buried up to his waist in shadow. As Zaluth watched, he sank back into the shadows, his brown eyes burning with dangerous intent. A shiver ran down the length of Zaluth's flesh. That human was hunting him. Hunting him. Baring his fangs in anger, the Krathlathe of the Slee felt the rage ignite within him. How dare this creature hunt him, a Krath, within the beating heart of the fifth? Humans did not belong here. Humans could not survive here. An ear-shattering, piercing cry split the air. It came from the huge beast, electricity crackling around his chest and arms, hanging from the slime ropes. Something about that screech speared into the Krath's brain, stunning and freezing him on the spot. Only for a moment, then control reasserted itself, just in time for him to contort his body once more. The axe flashed past his face, so close he felt the wind from it on his tongue. Infuriated, he spun and snapped with his jaw, eager to take a bit from this absurd human. Somehow, the weapon was there, between the soft flesh of the attacker and the Krath. When he bit down, he tasted only metal. A second later, the human was gone, retreating back into the shadows and taking the axe with him. So angry his flesh boiled and popped as the acid within him bubbled and frothed, Zaluth lost track of the battle, looking only at the shadows around him, waiting for the would-be hunter to emerge once more. It took until the third explosion for Zaluth to snap back to his senses. The detonations were deafening, the concussive force rolling through his body with each blast, and they were getting closer. Gripping tight to the wall of the heart with his foot, Zaluth compressed his body and camouflaged himself as best he could while racing away from the explosive magic. The battlefield was so hectic, so chaotic, it was impossible for the Krath to mount an organized defense. They were fighting hard, but more and more ants continued to emerge from the root. At this rate, they would soon be outnumbered. Once that happened, there might not be a way to turn the fight around. Zaluth's eyes burned red as he glared down at the cursed root. That damned tree would be cut down and used to feed the mold farms. When this was done, the tribes wouldn't settle for anything less. For now, he just needed to destroy that root, then they would have a chance. Unflattening his body, Zaluth whirled and spat a dense wad of mucus from deep within his body. A patch of gathering darkness on his left was scattered as the sizzling goop splattered over it. The slug hesitated. He could have sworn. Searing pain exploded from his side, and Zaluth hissed furiously as he twisted away. The gleaming blade of the axe sizzled with bright green acid as it pulled away. The human sank once more into the shadows, his steady gaze burning with intent as Zaluth cursed and spat. A deep gouge had been cut into his side, but it wouldn't be fatal. Already the acid in his flesh had cauterized the wound. How had the human managed to trick him? Again, the slug turned his gaze down to the massive root below. He didn't have time for this. Chapter 15:13, Sludge Artillery. If the ants kept flooding into the heart, then the fight was completely lost. Zaluth had grasped the numbers the insects had brought to the fifth while scouting their cursed platform. Rank after rank emerged from within the walls, no matter how many were injured or forced to fall back. With so many crafts still at the fortress, they couldn't hope to compete with a tenth of what the cursed insects could bring to bear. The invaders had to be stopped. Zaluth twisted himself around, his eyes spinning atop their stalks. Darkness and shadows lurked all around him, any of which could be used by the axe-wielding human. Danger was everywhere, but standing still wasn't any better. The only choice was to move, and he had a target in mind. He compressed his body flat against the wall and began to race as fast as he could, using camouflage to conceal himself and pulling the mana around him tight and close. He suspected his would-be hunter was still able to trace him, but there was no reason to make it any easier than he needed to. If the tribes were seeing any success in this fight so far, it was due to their cannon snails. Specially bred monsters who sucked in mucus and toxic mana before launching it in dense balls of power. Without a pool to feed them, the snail handlers were doing their best to guide the creatures towards the thick slime coating the walls of the heart so they could soak it up and fire it below, but they were being constantly hounded by the ants of darkness. Two antennae popped above his flattened body. Zaluth zigged and zagged his way along the wall, angling towards the massive, bloated snails. The wound in his side ached fiercely, but he did his best to ignore it. If he allowed himself to be tricked again, it wouldn't end with just this injury. The hunter was still around him now, he could feel it. The darkness around him waxed and waned, growing stronger and fading away like a living creature. At any moment, that wicked axe blade could emerge again, from any angle. This time, the scout was determined to see it coming. He almost didn't. Every shadow around him darkened at once, leaving him surrounded. Staying still would mean certain death, so he continued his charge, pushing his foot to the limit to extract every ounce of speed he could. All the while, he watched, waiting for the axe to emerge, waiting to see which of the shadows contained the hunter. At the last second, he realized the answer: none of them. Zaluth screeched to a halt, arresting his momentum so quickly he felt like his eyes almost fell off their stalks. Thunk! The axe smashed into the sludge-coated meat of the heart right in front of him. Whipping his eyes around, Zaluth could see the hunter sinking into a shadow under a destroyed platform held up by strings of mucus. In seconds, he would come to retrieve his weapon. This was the only moment of safety the Krath was going to get. The slug launched himself forward, sliding around the oversized weapon, gathering speed, and then he leapt off the wall. For a dizzying, heart-pounding moment, he hung in the air looking down at the swelling pool of blue mana below. If he fell, he stretched forward, jaw open wide, and latched onto a mucus string. His spindly hands snapped shut around it as his bite severed the strand, sending him swinging out through the heart, angled towards the cannon snails. When he released his grip, he'd underestimated the speed he'd gained and hit the wall with tremendous force. Splatted against the heart, he was barely able to recover and grip the surface properly before the wall pulsed and threw him off. Soluz. Zaluth croaked, then expanded himself a little and tried again. Soluzz. The Krathlathe of the Zist was directing his forces against the ants without much success. His powerful acid magic was barely enough to fend off the shadows and grasping limbs of the nightmare creature, but he wasn't making any headway against the forces massing below. Boiling with anger and frustration, the leader turned at the sound of his voice, mouth agape and fangs glistening. Zaluth pointed. We have to use the cannon snails to destroy the tree. It's our only chance. No Krathlathe wanted to be told what to do, especially in their own slime ground, especially by an inferior, yet Soluz hadn't risen to his position by virtue of his strength alone. Even in the depths of his rage, there was a calculating and cunning light in his eyes. With one quick glance down, then another toward the struggling beast tamers, he made his decision. Rally around me, he bellowed. Secure the snails. As a crowd of Krath formed, Zaluth was quick to force himself into their midst. Surrounded by slugs on all sides, he was surely safe from the hunter. If he emerged here, the Krath would welcome him gladly, with their fangs. Is there a mucus source we can feed the snails? Zaluth demanded once he managed to draw close to Soluz. Be quiet, the Krathlathe hissed. Do you think I'm stupid? There was only one right answer to that. Zaluth shook his head and slunk away, letting others press between them so he was no longer in Soluz's view. As long as the leader of the Sizith knew what needed to be done, that was enough. Chase away the shadows. Solus bellowed, and Zaluth hissed and spat along with the other slugs. That was an order he could certainly get behind.